Ericson, and I'm going to be talking to you today about documentation, system documentation to be more accurate. My background is that I went to art school, and then I decided that I was going to be a conservator, and so I went to art conservation school, and I would say about the end of grad school, I realized that I really liked doing research and collecting data and organizing it, and so then started to become interested in databases. And about 8 years after that, I made a decision to leave that field and start to do a more formal study of databases. And so I went back to school, and I was learning SQL and database standards, and at that time I was working for a design studio in LA, and they had a problem where they wanted to have their salespeople be connected into a database so that they could share their contacts. And they said, well, we want to do this in FileMaker. And I had worked in FileMaker for a while, but I hadn't ever actually gotten to a point of developing something or even creating something. It's like I did layouts because we were open in the system to be able to create whatever layouts we wanted. So I kind of looked at it and I'm like, I don't know. And John, it was right at that time that I said to the owner of the company, I said, we have to work with somebody else who knows a little bit more about developing. And it was the same time that John was holding his third boot camp. And so I went up for a couple of the days, and then we had John come and work on a solution for us that and then a few months later, John and I were talking, and he said, I could really use somebody to help write the requirements for a project that I'm working on. And I said, well, I could give it a try. And that's sort of how I got to where I am today, which is, I was given, these sort of formal documents that lay out the steps of what it is that you're trying to capture in documentation, in a requirements document, and then started to just fill in the building blocks of it. And I had written, when I was a conservator, I'd written a few training documents and explanations of how you should be entering what you're visually seeing about an object and guiding people into it. So I wasn't totally foreign to the idea of writing. And one of the things that a conservator does is that they write a lot of documentation about the condition of an object, of a piece of artwork. And what I found was that writing about databases was really similar to looking at all of the parts of a database. It compared quite well to looking at examining a piece of artwork from both the historical point of view and the scientific point of view and the current condition of something, and then where your plans were to go with it. And that's a lot. I don't necessarily think of documentation like that today, but that's how I started thinking about it. I took my knowledge of where I was coming from in a previous industry and applied it to this. And this talk was originally just about business requirements and system and functional requirements, and I kind of revamped it last night to go into a broader range of documentation. And so what we'll be covering today is, just kind of going through the steps of, what exactly is documentation? What does it mean to me? What should I be thinking about as a developer? Why it's important at all to worry about it, and particularly with the requirements document, because it is, if you work for a large company and their IT department has already set in place standards for requirements, they will probably hand you a document that says, we need to see this because these are part of our records. And I will walk you through some of the parts of it, just so that, and if you were ever in a situation where you feel like you needed to put into place those types of standards into your workplace, or maybe even your company as a development company, it's just some ways to kind of create standards, and then some suggestions on how to get through that process of writing, because I've heard a couple people say that they just really don't like to write, and so it's sort of like, how can you make it easier on yourself to do it? Could I get a show of hands of people that regularly do documentation on their systems? So it's about a little under half. And how many people do user guides for your solutions? A little bit more. For people that are working on an ongoing system, do you write release notes? Okay. So documentation it's really it's a way to keep a written record of something, and it's there for reference. It's there for you to communicate with somebody else. It's there to set some of the facts into place so that you have some clear direction, some clear focus of the project, of whether it's from a proposal that says, I think we're going to do this and it's going to cost this much, to actually getting into some of the more finer details when you're actually working on a project. And it also, the user guides provide instructions to both to the user, and then a developer guide would provide instruction to a system admin, in terms, if you were giving them that type of freedom to work on your system. So I would say, I've talked to people a lot about documentation and how they see it. And my take on it is that documentation is only as important as it is important for your business or for your client. Because if nobody's going to read it and nobody's going to pay attention to it, then it's not really valuable at all. But I would encourage people to put more value into encouraging the use of documentation, because it keeps you from having some pitfalls in the middle of development, especially in the middle of development. But it also is just creates some clarity that you can continue to reference. But it really should be practical and useful to what you're doing, and not go sort of like way overboard in terms of a 250-page document for a project that is going to take you 2 weeks to develop and deploy.